On the morning of April 12, 2023, in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Jakarta, Indonesia, a tragic incident took place that would later draw public and legal attention. The case involved a newlywed couple who had been married for less than 2 weeks. The husband, a 32-year-old small business owner, and the wife, a 27-year-old woman from a nearby province, had met through a mutual family introduction. Their wedding had been held according to Islamic traditions, attended by relatives, friends, and local community members. After the ceremony, the couple moved into a modest rented house where they began their new life together. At first, those around them noticed nothing unusual, and the marriage seemed to be progressing normally. However, an event inside their home soon led to a violent confrontation. This confrontation would escalate into a criminal case involving serious physical harm and, eventually, a fatal outcome. This is the account of how an early misunderstanding, combined with personal expectations and cultural pressures, led to an irreversible tragedy. The husband in this case, referred to here as Rafi, not his real name, was 32 years old at the time of the incident. He owned a small electronics repair shop located near a busy market in East Jakarta. Rafi had built his business over the course of 8 years and was known in the neighborhood as a quiet but hardworking man. He lived a relatively simple life, spending most of his time at work and returning home late in the evening. His social circle was small, consisting mostly of close family members and a few friends from his hometown. Rafi came from a conservative Muslim family. His parents, now retired, lived in a rural village several hours away. They had instilled in him the importance of religious observance, respect for elders, and maintaining a good reputation in the community. While he had previously been introduced to several potential marriage partners through family connections, none of those meetings had resulted in a formal engagement. The wife, referred to as Alia, not her real name, was 27 years old and originally from a smaller town in central Java. She was the second of 4 siblings and had previously worked as a sales assistant in a clothing store before moving to Jakarta. Alia was described by friends as polite and reserved. She had met Rafi through a family introduction arranged by her cousin, who was a mutual acquaintance of Rafi's older sister. Before their marriage, Rafi and Alia had only met in person a handful of times. These meetings were always conducted in the presence of family members, in accordance with cultural and religious customs. Their conversations were polite and general, focusing mostly on family background, work, and future plans. Neither had engaged in a deep discussion about personal past experiences or expectations regarding married life. The wedding took place on March 30, 2023, at Alia's family home. It was a modest event attended by approximately 80 guests, including relatives, neighbors, and close friends. The ceremony was led by a local religious official, and both families expressed happiness over the union. After the wedding, Alia moved into Rafi's rented house, located in a residential area not far from his workplace. The house was small but functional, consisting of a living room, 1 bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom. In the first week of their marriage, both Rafi and Alia appeared to be adjusting to their new roles. Rafi continued working during the day while Alia began managing the household. Neighbors occasionally saw them shopping together at the market or walking in the neighborhood. There were no visible signs of conflict, and relatives who visited during that period reported that the couple seemed polite and cooperative toward each other. However, beneath this calm exterior, there were unspoken expectations and assumptions on both sides. Rafi held a traditional view of marriage, influenced by his upbringing. He believed that a wife should be obedient, respectful, and maintain certain moral values, including sexual purity before marriage. While this belief was not something he openly discussed with Alia, it was a standard he quietly assumed she would meet. Alia, on the other hand, entered the marriage with her own hopes and concerns. Having lived independently for several years before meeting Rafi, she valued personal trust and understanding in a relationship. She was aware of the cultural emphasis on virginity before marriage but hoped that any matters from her past would not define her future. The couple's daily routine was predictable. Rafi would leave for work in the morning, and Alia would spend time cleaning the house, preparing meals, and occasionally contacting her family back in central Java. In the evenings they would eat dinner together, sometimes watching television before going to bed. There were occasional differences in opinion about household matters, but nothing that escalated into an argument during those initial days. Family involvement was limited but present. Rafi's older sister visited once during the first week to bring some household items and check on the couple. Alia's mother called her daughter regularly to ask about her adjustment to married life. Both families assumed the marriage was progressing without issues. The social environment around them was generally quiet. Their neighborhood consisted of working-class families, many of whom had known each other for years. The local community valued privacy, and it was not common for neighbors to interfere in personal matters unless invited. From the outside, Rafi and Alia's marriage appeared normal. Yet the absence of open communication about personal values and past experiences created a silent gap between them. This gap, though unnoticed at first, would become significant when a sensitive subject arose. During the early days of their marriage, the couple did not speak in detail about intimacy or personal histories. They focused on practical matters such as organizing household chores and discussing Rafi's work schedule. While this approach kept things peaceful in the short term, it meant that deeper topics, particularly those related to expectations and trust, remained unaddressed. It was in this atmosphere of outward normality but underlying uncertainty that the events leading to the tragedy began to take shape. Neither Rafi nor Alia could have predicted that a single conversation, combined with unspoken cultural pressures, would set into motion a chain of events that would end their marriage in the most irreversible way possible. The incident that led to the eventual tragedy began on the night of April 9, 2023, roughly 10 days after Rafi and Alia's wedding. That evening started like most others. Rafi returned from his shop around 7:30 p.m., carrying some groceries he had purchased on his way home. Alia prepared dinner, steamed rice, vegetables, and fried fish, and they ate together in the small living room. Their conversation during the meal was casual, covering Rafi's customers that day and a phone call Alia had received from her younger sister. After dinner, Rafi suggested that they spend more time together in the bedroom, a request that was not unusual since their marriage. However, during their interaction, Rafi noticed something that, in his mind, raised doubts about Alia's sexual history. He did not say anything immediately, but his demeanor changed. He became quieter, less engaged in conversation, and his body language indicated discomfort. Alia noticed the change and asked if something was wrong, but Rafi replied that he was simply tired from work. Later that night, while they were lying in bed, Rafi brought up the subject directly. His question was brief and blunt. He asked Alia if she had ever been physically intimate with another man before their marriage. The tone of his voice was firm, and his expression suggested he expected a direct answer. Alia hesitated before responding. She understood the weight of the question in the context of their cultural and religious environment. After a short pause, she admitted that she had been in a relationship several years earlier that had become physically intimate. She explained that the relationship had ended long before she met Rafi and that she had not spoken to the man since. Rafi remained silent for several seconds after her admission. His face showed no immediate sign of anger, but his posture became tense. He asked her why she had not told him before they got married. Alia replied that she believed her past was private and that she had not wanted it to affect his view of her or their future together. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Rafi asking pointed questions and Alia answering as calmly as she could. However, it was clear that Rafi was becoming increasingly unsettled. His voice grew sharper, and his questions shifted from seeking information to expressing disappointment. The exchange ended without resolution. Rafi turned away from Alia and said he needed time to think. Alia remained quiet, unsure of how to continue the conversation without making the situation worse. They both eventually fell asleep, but the emotional distance between them had noticeably grown. The following day, Rafi's behavior toward Alia changed. He was less communicative in the morning, speaking only about necessary matters such as breakfast and his work schedule. Alia sensed that the conversation from the previous night had left a deep impression on him. She considered calling her mother for advice but decided to wait, hoping that Rafi would eventually move past the issue. However, when Rafi returned from work that evening, the subject resurfaced. This time, his tone was more accusatory. He repeated his question about why Alia had hidden her past from him and suggested that she had been dishonest from the beginning. Alia tried to explain again that she had not lied but had simply chosen not to share that part of her history because she wanted to focus on their present and future. The conversation became more heated. Rafi raised his voice and Alia, feeling defensive, also began to speak louder. Both expressed frustration, though neither resorted to insults or physical aggression at this stage. Neighbors later reported hearing voices from the house that evening, though they could not make out specific words. Over the next 2 days, the tension in the household continued to build. Rafi's trust in Alia had been shaken, and he began to interpret small disagreements or misunderstandings as signs of deeper incompatibility. Alia, meanwhile, felt increasingly anxious and isolated. She avoided unnecessary conversation, focusing instead on household chores and spending time alone in the bedroom when Rafi was home. During this period, there was no mediation from family members. Both Rafi and Alia kept the matter private, not wanting others to know about their disagreement. However, this lack of outside support meant that their conflict remained unresolved and was left to escalate on its own. The breaking point came on the evening of April 12, 2023. Rafi returned home earlier than usual. Around 6:15 p.m. Alia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Rafi entered and began asking questions about her previous relationship. Unlike their earlier conversations, Rafi's tone was now openly confrontational. He questioned not only her past but also her moral character and whether she had entered the marriage with honest intentions. Alia attempted to end the conversation by suggesting they discuss it another time, but Rafi insisted on continuing. His frustration grew as Alia remained firm in her explanation that her past was behind her and had no bearing on her commitment to him. The exchange lasted several minutes and ended with Rafi leaving the house abruptly. He returned about an hour later, his mood visibly more agitated. According to later court testimony, Rafi admitted that during this time away from home, he had been thinking about the matter and discussing it briefly with a male friend, who advised him to demand the truth. This advice appeared to reinforce his determination to confront Alia again, leading directly to the events that would follow. This unresolved confrontation, rooted in differing expectations, personal beliefs, and a lack of early communication, marked the beginning of a rapid escalation. What had started as a private discussion between husband and wife would soon cross the line into physical violence and ultimately result in irreversible consequences. Following the second confrontation on April 12, 2023, the relationship between Rafi and Alia entered a sustained period of tension. The unresolved disagreement from the previous nights had shifted their daily interactions from cooperative to strained. Communication between them was limited to essential matters, such as meals, household chores, and Rafi's work schedule. On the morning of April 13th, Rafi left for work earlier than usual. He did not speak much to Alia, and she avoided initiating conversation. When he returned home that evening, he ate dinner in silence and went to bed without further discussion. Alia interpreted his behavior as a sign that he was still upset. She considered calling her older sister for advice but ultimately decided to wait, hoping that the tension would fade with time. However, the following day, Rafi again brought up the subject of Alia's past. This time he asked more specific questions about her previous relationship, how long it lasted, why it ended, and whether her family had known about it. Alia's responses remained consistent. She admitted to the past relationship but maintained that it was over long before she met Rafi and had no relevance to their marriage. The conversation became repetitive, with Rafi asking the same questions in different ways, seemingly looking for inconsistencies in her answers. Alia began to feel that the discussion was no longer about understanding but about testing her honesty. This approach increased her frustration. She told Rafi she would not continue answering the same questions repeatedly, suggesting they seek guidance from a trusted elder or religious figure if he felt unable to move past the issue. Rafi did not respond positively to this suggestion. He expressed concern that involving others would damage his reputation and make their personal conflict public. His refusal to seek outside help meant the matter remained confined to their home, where neither had the tools to resolve it constructively. By April 14th, the tension had started to affect their routines. Rafi returned from work later than usual, sometimes after 9 p.m., and Alia began eating dinner alone. Their time spent together was minimal, and when they did speak, the subject often returned to the disagreement. On the evening of April 15th, the conversation took a sharper turn. After a short exchange about household expenses, Rafi again brought up Alia's past. His tone was more accusatory than before, suggesting that she had intentionally deceived him before marriage. Alia defended herself, repeating that she had not lied but had chosen to keep the matter private because it was part of her past and no longer relevant. The discussion quickly escalated into an argument. Both raised their voices and their words became more direct and critical. Alia accused Rafi of being unwilling to move forward, while Rafi accused Alia of breaking his trust. The argument ended with Rafi leaving the house abruptly, without saying where he was going. When he returned an hour later, Rafi was still visibly agitated. He did not speak to Alia before going to bed. Alia stayed in the living room for some time, thinking about whether she should inform her family about the situation. She ultimately decided against it, still hoping that the matter could be resolved privately. Over the next 2 days, April 16th and 17th, the pattern repeated. Brief periods of silence were interrupted by renewed questioning from Rafi. Each time the conversation grew more tense and less productive. Alia began to feel isolated, spending most of her time in the bedroom or on the phone with friends to distract herself. Rafi, meanwhile, appeared increasingly withdrawn during the day and confrontational in the evenings. Neighbors began noticing changes in the couple's behavior. They saw Rafi returning home later and Alia going out less frequently. One neighbor later told investigators that she had heard raised voices coming from the house on at least 2 occasions during that week. The lack of resolution was beginning to take an emotional toll on both individuals. Rafi's mistrust deepened, and Alia's patience diminished. Without a clear plan to address their disagreement, both became stuck in a cycle of conflict. On April 18th, a brief moment of calm occurred. That evening, Rafi came home at his usual time, and they ate dinner together without discussing the past. Alia took this as a sign that he might be moving on from the issue. However, later that night, as they were preparing for bed, Rafi unexpectedly asked another pointed question about her previous relationship. Alia, frustrated, refused to answer. This refusal reignited his anger, and the conversation quickly became heated. Although no physical violence occurred that night, the verbal exchanges were becoming increasingly sharp. Both used a tone that suggested not only disagreement but also personal resentment. This shift marked a significant change from the more restrained discussions they had in the early days of the conflict. The following day, April 19th, Rafi remained quiet in the morning but called Alia twice from work. In both calls, he returned to the same subject, questioning her explanations and accusing her of hiding details. Alia ended the second call abruptly, saying she would not discuss the matter over the phone. By this point, the disagreement had lasted more than a week without resolution. Each attempt at conversation seemed to make matters worse, and the frequency of these exchanges indicated that the issue was not fading. On April 20th, the tension reached a point where both individuals were avoiding each other in their own home. Rafi stayed in the living room watching television for hours, while Alia remained in the bedroom. They spoke only about essential matters such as bills and groceries. Yet the underlying issue remained unaddressed and unresolved. The pattern of repeated questioning, defensive responses, and escalating frustration created an environment in which even small disagreements felt more intense. Without intervention or a deliberate decision to de-escalate, the risk of the conflict turning into something more serious was increasing. This ongoing tension, built on mistrust, cultural expectations, and the absence of effective communication, set the stage for the events that would follow. What began as a personal conversation had become a persistent source of conflict, eroding the couple's relationship and pushing it toward a breaking point. On the evening of April 21, 2023, the ongoing conflict between Rafi and Alia reached its most serious point. That Friday began like many others. Rafi worked at his electronics repair shop throughout the day, while Alia stayed home. She completed household chores, cooked a simple lunch for herself, and spent part of the afternoon speaking to her younger sister on the phone. Rafi returned home at approximately 7:15 p.m. He appeared quiet at first, greeting Alia briefly before sitting down in the living room. Alia served dinner and they ate in near silence. Afterward, Rafi remained seated while Alia cleared the table and washed the dishes. Shortly before 8 p.m., Rafi began speaking to Alia about the subject that had been the center of their arguments for over a week, her previous relationship. He asked again whether there were details she had not shared. Alia replied that she had already told him everything and that there was nothing more to explain. She suggested that if he could not accept her past, they should consider discussing their future with their families. Rafi rejected this idea, insisting that the matter be resolved between the two of them. His tone became firm and he repeated his question several times, asking for what he called the complete truth. Alia's responses did not change. She reiterated that her past was behind her and had no effect on her commitment to their marriage. The conversation soon became tense. Rafi's voice rose and Alia in turn began speaking louder in response. Their words became more confrontational, with Rafi accusing Alia of dishonesty and Alia accusing Rafi of refusing to let go of the issue. At around 8:20 p.m., according to later testimony, the argument escalated into physical contact. Rafi stood up from his chair and moved closer to Alia. Witnesses would later report hearing a loud noise from inside the house at this time, though they could not see what was happening. Investigators later concluded that Rafi struck Alia during this moment. The initial blow caused her to stumble backward. Alia attempted to retreat toward the bedroom, but Rafi followed her. The confrontation continued inside the bedroom, where the argument persisted in raised voices. During the next several minutes, the situation turned increasingly violent. Alia suffered multiple blows to the head and upper body. The investigation found no evidence that she attempted to physically retaliate. Instead, she appeared to have tried to shield herself and create distance. However, the limited space inside the bedroom made it difficult for her to move away. By approximately 8:35 p.m., the noise from the house had drawn the attention of two neighbors, who stepped outside to see if anything was wrong. One of them later stated that she called out toward the house, but there was no reply. Inside, Alia collapsed to the floor. Rafi later told police that he realized she was unresponsive and attempted to shake her awake. When there was no reaction, he called a male friend and told him that something had gone wrong. The friend advised him to contact emergency services immediately. Rafi called for an ambulance at around 8:42 p.m. Paramedics arrived approximately 15 minutes later. Upon arrival, they found Alia unconscious with visible injuries to her head and face. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where she was placed in the emergency department for immediate treatment. Despite medical efforts, Alia's condition did not improve. She was pronounced dead shortly after midnight on April 22, 2023. The attending physician recorded the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with multiple impacts. Police officers who arrived at the hospital shortly after were informed of the suspected cause of death and proceeded to detain Rafi for questioning. He was taken to the local police station, where he gave an initial statement acknowledging that an argument had occurred but claiming he did not intend for it to result in serious harm. The news of Alia's death was quickly relayed to her family in Central Java, who traveled to Jakarta the following morning. Her parents and siblings were informed of the circumstances and provided statements to investigators. By the end of April 22, police had sealed the couple's rented house as a crime scene. Forensic teams collected evidence, including items from the bedroom and living room, as well as clothing worn by both parties at the time of the incident. Neighbors were interviewed, and several confirmed hearing raised voices and loud noises on the night of April 21. This series of events marked the irreversible turning point in the case. What had begun as a private disagreement between husband and wife had now become a criminal investigation into a fatal incident. Rafi was placed under arrest pending formal charges, and Alia's body was returned to her family for burial in her hometown. Following Rafi's arrest in the early hours of April 22, 2023, the East Jakarta police opened a formal investigation into the incident. Rafi was initially placed in a holding cell while officers conducted preliminary interviews with him, neighbors, and Alia's relatives. His arrest was based on suspicion of causing fatal injuries during a domestic dispute. The first stage of the investigation involved collecting and reviewing physical evidence from the scene. Forensic officers photographed the living room and bedroom where the events had taken place. Several objects were collected for analysis, including clothing, bedding with visible bloodstains, and Rafi's personal mobile phone. Medical records from the hospital confirmed that Alia had sustained multiple blunt force injuries to the head and upper body, which were consistent with repeated physical strikes. Neighbors were called to the station to provide formal statements. Two neighbors confirmed hearing loud arguments on the night of April 21, followed by noises that sounded like objects being struck or moved. One neighbor reported calling out toward the house but receiving no reply. These accounts supported the timeline Rafi had given but contradicted his initial suggestion that the physical harm was accidental. Alia's family provided further information about her background and recent communications. Her mother stated that Alia had spoken to her a few days before the incident, mentioning that she and Rafi had been arguing but saying little about the details. She had not expressed fear for her safety, and her family had not anticipated any physical harm. Rafi's first formal police interrogation took place on April 23. During this session, he admitted to striking Alia but claimed it was in the heat of the argument and that he had lost control. He maintained that he had no intention of killing her. When asked why the argument had escalated, he repeated that it was due to learning about her past relationship. Based on the evidence and statements gathered, the police filed charges under Article 338 of the Indonesian Criminal Code for murder, with an alternative charge under Article 351 for aggravated assault resulting in death. Given the seriousness of the charges, Rafi was remanded to detention pending trial. The case was forwarded to the East Jakarta District Prosecutor's Office in early May 2023. The prosecution reviewed the police report, forensic findings, and witness statements before deciding to pursue the primary charge of aggravated assault resulting in death, which carried a potential sentence of up to 15 years in prison. The prosecutor argued that although there was no premeditation, the repeated blows showed clear intent to cause serious harm, which ultimately proved fatal. The trial began in July 2023 at the East Jakarta District Court. Rafi appeared in custody, wearing plain clothing and accompanied by his defense attorney. The proceedings were open to the public, though attendance was limited to maintain order. The prosecution presented its case first. They called forensic experts who testified that Alia's injuries were consistent with multiple impacts delivered with significant force. A medical examiner confirmed that the fatal injury was a severe head trauma that would have rendered her unconscious almost immediately before death. The prosecution also presented photographs from the crime scene, as well as statements from neighbors and Alia's family. During cross-examination, Rafi's defense attempted to emphasize that the incident was not planned and occurred during a moment of emotional stress. They argued that the repeated questioning about Alia's past had caused Rafi to become overwhelmed, leading to a sudden and regrettable act. They requested the court to consider a reduced charge of manslaughter. Rafi himself took the stand during the defense phase of the trial. He admitted to the physical violence but expressed remorse for his actions. He told the court he had called for help as soon as he realized Alia was unresponsive. When asked why he did not seek assistance earlier during the confrontation, he said he had underestimated the severity of her injuries. The prosecution countered that remorse after the fact did not diminish the seriousness of the actions that caused Alia's death. They argued that the repeated blows, the continuation of the attack after she had tried to retreat, and the delay in seeking medical help were all aggravating factors. The trial lasted for 6 hearings over the course of 2 months. Closing arguments were presented in late August 2023. The prosecution requested a sentence of 13 years imprisonment, citing the severity of the injuries, the nature of the attack, and the absence of any attempt to resolve the conflict through nonviolent means. The defense requested a sentence of no more than 7 years, emphasizing the lack of premeditation and Rafi's cooperation with authorities after the incident. On September 12, 2023, the court delivered its verdict. The panel of 3 judges found Rafi guilty of aggravated assault resulting in death under Article 351(3) of the Criminal Code. In their written judgment, the judges stated that the evidence clearly showed Rafi had intentionally inflicted physical harm on Alia, and that the injuries were severe enough to cause death. While they acknowledged the absence of premeditation, they determined that the violence was disproportionate and avoidable. Rafi was sentenced to 12 years in prison and ordered to pay compensation to Alia's family. The compensation covered funeral expenses and an additional sum for moral damages, in accordance with Indonesian law. The court also ordered that the items collected from the crime scene be destroyed, except for certain personal belongings which were returned to Alia's family. Following the verdict, Alia's family expressed a measure of relief that the case had been resolved, though they stated that no legal outcome could truly make up for their loss. Rafi's legal team initially considered an appeal but later decided against it, and the verdict became final in October 2023. With the conclusion of the trial, the case was closed, leaving both families to confront the lasting consequences of the events that had taken place over a span of less than 1 month. The tragic case of Aisha and Karim left a profound impact on the community in Surabaya and beyond. The incident sparked public conversations about domestic violence, gender equality, and the pressures that can come with societal and cultural expectations in marriage. Many residents expressed shock and sadness over how a newly formed marriage could end so violently, particularly when the underlying issue was rooted in a personal matter that could have been addressed with communication rather than aggression. For the local Muslim community, the event raised questions about the interpretation of religious and cultural values regarding purity, trust, and forgiveness. While some believe that honesty before marriage is important, many also emphasize that no amount of disappointment or anger justifies violence. Religious leaders used their Friday sermons to remind congregants that the Prophet Muhammad himself encouraged kindness and mercy toward one's spouse, highlighting that abuse in any form contradicts Islamic teachings. The legal outcome, with Karim receiving a prison sentence for his actions, was seen as a necessary step in upholding justice. It also served as a reminder that domestic abuse is a criminal act, regardless of cultural sensitivities or personal grievances. Women's rights organizations in Indonesia used the case to push for stronger enforcement of domestic violence laws and better protection for victims. In the weeks following the trial, Aisha's family worked to honor her memory by advocating for educational programs that promote healthy communication in relationships. They partnered with local NGOs to host community discussions on conflict resolution, the importance of consent, and how to seek help in abusive situations. On social media, the story spread widely, attracting both sympathy and heated debates. Many shared their own experiences of facing judgment or mistreatment within marriage, while others focused on the importance of educating young men and women about mutual respect. The case also reached national news outlets, leading to televised discussions about how modern values and traditional customs can sometimes clash, and how those conflicts should be managed without resorting to harm. For Karim, the prison sentence marked a turning point in his life. According to statements from his lawyer, he expressed regret for his actions during the trial, admitting that his anger overwhelmed his judgment. However, for many in the public, the remorse came too late to change the fact that a life had been lost. The broader reflection from this tragedy is clear. Marriage should be built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. When conflicts arise, whether related to personal expectations, cultural beliefs, or emotional disappointments, resolving them peacefully is essential. Violence not only destroys relationships but can also lead to irreversible consequences, as seen in this case. In the end, Aisha's story serves as a cautionary tale and a call to action. It reminds individuals, families, and communities that addressing issues with empathy, patience, and respect is far more valuable than letting anger dictate one's actions. Her memory continues to inspire efforts to create safer and more respectful relationships, ensuring that such a tragedy does not happen again.